Hello there, EV here. Today we're checking out the Be Quiet Dark Rock 4, but first things first, if you want to skip to any particular part of the review, please go to the video description. There are timestamps set up for you. You can skip to the unboxing, go straight ahead to them, skip this intro part, all the installation, sound testing. You can skip the rant that I have, a valid rant, but you can skip it if you want, I won't blame you. Or there is some B-roll. I got a little creative with the B-roll this time. I always generally do, but there's a little bit of something that I haven't tried before, so if you want to check that out, then feel free to. It's actually a very nice looking cooler, so it's worth a little visit. And then we have sort of sound testing, which is pretty crude. It's not decibel figures and things like that. It's very much a microphone sound test, so it's very much a perceptive sort of test. And then we have a more in-depth thermal testing section, which we'll break down. So the first half, it's a very long video. First 20 minutes is basically, well, including this bit of the intro now, it's going to be the installation, unboxing, installation, and then there's a bit of a rant during that installation, and then the second half is a little bit of B-roll, sound testing, and the thermal testing, then the conclusion, which will probably knock it over the 40-minute mark. If you want to check out prices in your region, you can head to the video description as well and check out the Amazon affiliate links. We have about 9 regions covered. Well, we had 9, now we've got 8 because Canada's lost the Amazon affiliate account for EVGA, so I've been trying to set that up, but you have to link it to like your phone, and you got to get like a text thing coming through, and that's a nightmare at the best of times, and it won't recognize my number this time round. Apparently it can't contact it when it could before. And due to my incompetencies, just to do my due diligence, if you purchase anything through the Amazon affiliate links, we will earn between 4 and 12% of your total purchase. Without keeping this video too long, if you're interested, this is our first 160mm cooler in our big roundup of several categories, and in those categories we've selected coolers based on their size, semi-RAM compatibility, nothing too beefy that overhangs RAM, but something as beefy as possible without overhanging the RAM, and several so on, different decisions made into getting those. I'm not going to go through all of it now, but essentially, yes, this is the first 160mm cooler we're testing in this roundup. We've already tested the 120 and the 80mm cooler, and the winners of all these categories will be coming forward with us to do a more in-depth case testing methodology, or to do more in-depth case testing with a new methodology. That makes more sense. So yeah, that's the basic roundup of what we're doing here, and hopefully once we've tested all the 160mm coolers, which should be in about a month's time, we can get back to our grassroots and check out some new cases such as the level 20 VT from Thermaltake, and really get back to our grassroots. Case testing really is the core of this channel, because you can make some really in-depth videos and get really nitty-gritty into those sorts of things. But we will be doing the same with this review now, so thank you for checking this one out. I really hope you enjoy it, and I will catch you in a second for the unboxing. The Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 is, for all intents and purposes, a 160mm cooler that claims to be able to handle a 200W TDP CPU, and since we're testing it with a 91W TDP 6700K, we shouldn't see any thermal throttling later. Straight into the unboxing, we're first met with the included fans box. Underneath this is another box that's squeezed into a cutout of the closed cell foam, which is encasing the cooler itself. The packaging and presentation is pretty nice, although I'm not a huge fan of the closed cell foam. I prefer cardboard like Noctua's cooler range, and of course you get a small packet of silica gel which shouldn't be eaten. Inside the more secretive cardboard box is all the paperwork and installation hardware you need other than the cooler itself. In total, we have the installation manuals in English, French, Spanish, German, Polish, and Russian. There are fan clips for 2 fans, or I suppose the one set is for a backup of the other, and then there's a general mounting hardware selection. Back to those fan clips for a second. They're not smooth like most of us would be used to. The finish is actually rough like a chalkboard. It feels very much like unfinished mild steel and looks like there are very tiny patches of rust or some sort of oxidization. I can't say I'm a fan of this finish in the slightest, and in my opinion, I think they should have used some sort of finish to keep the quality up. As for the packet with all the installation hardware, we're not going to take a look at every screw and nut this time, but it contains a mounting package for these Intel sockets at the top of the screen now, and these AMD sockets at the bottom of the screen now. There's just too much compatibility for me to go through. We also have a central mounting bridge, some thermal paste, and 2 screws for the aforementioned mounting bridge. Over to the fan. There wasn't anything to unbox but the fan itself in its own packaging, so we skipped the unboxing to say it's a 135mm fan, not a 140mm fan as some may initially think. It has a black plastic braided cable, which in my opinion is far better than the rubberized sleeving on Noctua coolers, and the braided sheath nicely terminates with some heat shrink tubing to a black 4-pin fan connector for all your PWM control needs. Something I really like about the Be Quiet fans is the zigzagged pattern to the blades. This is a running theme throughout their fan ranges and creates a really nice effect when the fan spins up. It may not be the most efficient design for cooling, but they look really cool, and for those who want to know the tech specs, it spins up to 1400 RPM plus or minus 10% and requires 0.4 amps to run, useful for those who are using fan splitter cables. As for the manual, it has to be said that this is the best user guide I've seen yet. Let me show you why. First off, there's this scope of delivery section that shows everything that should be in your package. Take note of the little numbers to the top left of the representational images. Then when you flip the manual over, there are full explanations for each step depending on which socket you're using, with some clear illustrations. Remember a second ago I mentioned to take note of the number in the scope of delivery section? Here's an example of why the manual is so well made. I'm just going to quickly read part of a paragraph. Screw the Intel 115X/1366 nuts 8 onto the previously positioned Intel backplate 3, then position the Intel mounting brackets 4 over the Intel 115X/1366 nuts 8 and affix these with the mounting bracket fastening screws 10. I don't think I need to read any more. The explanations are fantastic and I've not come across any grammatical errors unless you consider backplate to be two separate words, or spelling mistakes unlike the Silverstone manuals and Leon Lee's website. That's enough from the manual. Embedded inside the closed cell foam package of the cooler, there's a long neck screwdriver which will come in handy if you don't already own one. And now for the cooler itself, this is the main article. So let's break down all the features of this cooler. First off, this cooler looks fantastic, and you're going to see all the angles shortly. Each fin is aluminium that's painted black, and although that negatively affects performance, and it does, it's up to the consumers to let Be Quiet know what they want. The front of the cooler has a zigzag pattern similar to the fan that I presume helps with airflow somehow. The front of the fins are cut in an angular shape where the center of the fins are further from the fan than the edges. This likely reduces pressure to the center of the cooler to encourage air to spread more evenly across the fins, since the highest pressure will be to the outside of the cooler where the fan's blades are moving the air at a faster rate. So how about the back of the cooler? Well, this is where the fins look at their best, and rightly so. Why would you have the best side of the cooler at the front behind a fan? I don't see a clear reason as to why this design would be the most optimal to improve cooling efficiency or heat transfer. Having every other 3 fins change their shape to impact air pressure across different parts of the fin doesn't make as much sense to me as having every other fin change its shape gradually throughout the cooler to evenly spread heat across the entire fin. This doesn't appear to be the most optimal design, but perhaps it's more optimal than a standard fin shape. Either way, it looks really good. But if you have any scientific papers proving this or otherwise, I'm always interested to learn these things, so please let me know in the comments. The sides of the fins are cut and folded to create a linear catch for the fan hooks later, but notice how there is no design consideration for removing the fan clips. This should prepare you for what's coming later. Up top is a really clean piece of design. From what I can tell, the heat pipe tip caps are built into the aluminium top plate, which makes the joints very clean, and one of my favourite parts is the beveled edge to the top plate. Everything is painted black as to suit the rest of the cooler so far, and a Be Quiet logo is embedded into the brushed aluminium plate. Be careful if you're looking to own this cooler, or a cooler with a finish similar to this, as damaging it can be all too easy. And finally up here we find some hex head screws that grip into the first 5 or so fins to keep the top plate sealed down. Moving down to the bottom of the cooler, you can make out the U-shaped structure of the heat pipes, and if you look very carefully you'll just be able to make out some more complex geometry in the fins. The 6 heat pipes run down and through the base plate, which is formed from copper. Well, at least the bottom half is. I strongly suspect the bracket to the top half of this base plate is formed from aluminium, in line with most stuffer coolers. Why use copper when there is no want to retain heat? A few moments ago I said if you look very carefully you might be able to make out some more complex geometry in the fins. It's these dimples that create that effect, which increases the surface area of the fin while creating some extra friction between the fins and the air to increase thermal transfer. At least that's the theory. As for the base plate itself, this is where things get shiny. Just before we dazzle ourselves with the smoothness of the base plate, it's good to emphasize how spread out these heat pipes are. There's barely any part of the base plate's profile that hasn't got a heat pipe running through it. Now back to the shiny stuff. To be able to present the machining of the base plate, I had to angle the camera very specifically and use the lens reversal macro trick to really show the tiny grooves from the sanding process. This isn't exactly grade 8 steel polishing. I mean, we're not looking at a mirror finish, and Be Quiet haven't issued us with cotton gloves to handle it, but it's extremely smooth and it's worth handling with extra care to avoid scraping. So I think we've covered the overview of the cooler enough. Now let's get on to the installation. Here we have all the hardware required to mount the Dark Rock 4 to an LGA 1151 socket. A quick run through shows us the backplate, screws, rubber washers and front side nuts. Then we have the front side mounting arms with their screws, some thermal paste, the mounting bridge and its screws. But quickly back to that thermal paste, this is how it should be done. Be Quiet state that this is enough for 1 to 2 applications, and this is an appropriate amount of plastic used for that amount of thermal paste. Sure, you could use a little less plastic, but this is far ahead of the competing brands' ideas of an appropriate thermal paste storage for the same 1 to 2 applications. Sure, it's not going to get you to buy the cooler, but someone at Be Quiet thought environmentally and economically, probably more of the latter, and made a better decision. Good job, Be Quiet. And back to the parts, of course we have the cooler and the fan with its fan clips, and not forgetting the Be Quiet screwdriver. So first step is to form the back plate out of the screws and the washers. This creates a nice cushion to the motherboard and holds the back plate above the surface of the board. This unit can be slotted through the back of the motherboard and held in place on the other side with the included nuts. These are big enough with a knurled face to allow them to be hand tightened, but there is a cross head to allow them to be tightened a little further with the screwdriver. This will help to keep the mount secure, and the excess pressure is stored in the rubber washers to the rear. Next up are the brackets that are fixed to the previously installed nuts with their own screws. This is a very well thought out process so far, but I have some reservations about putting too much pressure into these screws, which could cause some issues with demounting the cooler afterwards. Anyone who's had issues with motherboard standoffs may know what I'm talking about here, but we'll find out whether that's a problem just before we go over into the thermals. As for thermal paste, I'm still yet to have a complaint about the amount I use, and to avoid this further still, I'm going to use an excessive amount because we don't know the capability of this mounting solution until we've tested it. If there's any excess, then the mounting pressure will squeeze it out the sides, and then we can tell how much was wasted. Just to clarify the situation, we're using Arctic MX2 as a control thermal paste instead of using the included thermal paste with the cooler. This removes a variable that would otherwise disable us from directly comparing cooler performance. Now we need to apply the mounting bridge to the base plate before installation. I install coolers to a vertical motherboard, so it's not viable for us to install the bridge afterwards. There's no clip or screw to secure the bridge in place, so we'll just have to hope it doesn't shift position. During installation, it's best to tighten each side of the bridge down evenly to ensure an even spread of thermal paste and an even mounting pressure to the CPU and socket. But for some reason, I felt I couldn't tighten the bridge down all the way, so I removed it to take a closer look. It would appear that somehow the bridge had shifted over a notch and was proud of the flush position it was supposed to have, which explains why I couldn't tighten it down properly. This could be remedied by perhaps installing the cooler to a horizontal motherboard, but I'd prefer the bridge and base plate to be simplified in order to prevent this problem from ever occurring. There should only really be as many notches as there is necessary, and any more is just adding complication with no purpose. So paying particular attention to guarantee the bridge wasn't going to shift, which made holding it all together a bit of a logistical pain, we finally mounted the cooler successfully. Now it's time to install the fan. This presented another pain, but this pain manifested into physical pain rather than mental pain. I found after trying to pull both clips over at the same time, it just wouldn't work, so I actually thought there might have been a difference between the two sets of fan clips, so I grabbed the other set to double check, but they were the same lengths. So after a little more fruitless pulling, I decided to change tactics. I went for the 1-2 approach and attached one side before easing the fan over to allow the other clip to slot in place. This isn't the worst mounting, it could have been bad enough for me to have to remove the graphics card, but it wasn't exactly ideal. First things first, I want to preface this with my bad. I should have installed the RAM stick first before I installed the fan, but this brings up a really interesting point with regards to form follows function. That's the mantra that you generally use when you want to create a successful product, or at least one that works very well. You generally follow form follows function because it leads to a product that functions well, and you can worry about the form afterwards and how it looks. If you generally go into designing a product thinking it's got to look great, then generally you'll compromise on its ability to work. So going into this sort of little rant now, if you want to skip this, go there. And if you're a Be Quiet apologist, actually, get your fingers ready, flex them, you know, get them ready to type. Once you've seen this, please answer me this. Why shouldn't this particular part I'm going to talk about be designed better? Why not design it better if it can be designed better? Which I'll give you an example of now. So to install the fan against the cooler, you need these wire clips, which I've shown you just then, and you slot them into these hooks, into all these fins, which creates a sort of linear catch all the way down the entire stack on both sides. Now, if you want to remove that, remove the fan for some reason, like, I just forgot to install the RAM first, I'll just whip it off quickly, then you need to get rid of these clips. Now, there are no segments down this entire stack with all these hooks where you can get your fingers into to reach at that clip, and there is no extra hook on that clip for you to be able to pull it off and remove the fan. So instead you need to resort to things like trying to press the sides of the clip, which hurts a hell of a lot, and it doesn't actually pull it off. All it does is manage to do is scrape the finish of the thin black paint on the fin. It needs to be thin because it's the fins are designed for thermal transmittance, and you don't want a large extra layer for you to have to thermally transmit your heat through. You want to keep that nice and thin. In fact, painting it black in the first place is a bad idea, but in terms of performance, but it looks good, and if it's thin enough, then okay. So this creates problems because you can't get the clip off properly because there wasn't any or, well, much at all, if at all, any thought gone into removal of these clips. Now, this is basic stuff. This is super basic stuff. This stuff has been thought into, this kind of thought has gone into the designs of things like much smaller Be Quiet fan clips, actually. Yeah, there was a Be Quiet one that I reviewed, we can check out in the top right corner. That has the fan clips, from what I can remember, correctly sorted out. As well as the Cryorig M9i, I think, has a tab on a fan clip. Yeah, these have all been thought of by much cheaper coolers and been designed better than this. So okay, here's my thing. If better ways of doing this has been thought of in the past, why the hell, Be Quiet, why the hell can you not be, and I'm gonna say this as aggressively as I am going to now for effect, why have you shown the level of incompetence as to not include a more foolproof solution for this design? Now, here's my preface. What should have happened is that they should have tied off the design of the rear of the cooler, which has this geometric sort of patterns going on, and tied it into the fan clip design so that you have hit and miss hooks, where half of the entire length is hooks and half of it are sort of hit and miss sections where you can get your fingers into to pull away at those clips. And it can be quite low profile, it can be quite sleek, quite a nice design, and it can also work way better than this, because all this does is encourage more scraping, more difficulty, and more irritants. Now, here's my big issue with all of this. Some people don't find it as easy as many other people in life to do certain things. And when it comes to design, it should be as inclusive as possible. So, a great instance is why design 2 steps in a rise in some level when you can design a ramp, which means that more people can get up it? Why not design both in? Some people don't work with ramps so well, so why not have stairs too? If you can do something better, you should. So, if for people that have, say, arthritis, doing this would be the most irritating thing possible. I can't imagine something more fiddly and annoying for somebody to have to deal with than an incompetently designed fan clip system. And if you're new to this stuff and you go, oh, Be Quiet, it's been rated so high and it's got all this performance stuff, I want to get that. If you're new to building a computer and you don't know how hard to push on things and whether you're the one that's being incompetent, then this is just going to be so frustrating. So, here's my thing. This should be designed better, way better than what we've got here. I critique everything. If something's bad, I will point it out. If something's good, I'll also point it out. This thing looks fantastic. It just doesn't function as well as it looks in terms of its installation. So there we have it. I'm going to see how this goes. That scraping will happen because I don't think there's a way you can do it without happening. It's already happened already just from me trying. So yeah, that's it. I've gone on for long enough. Apologies for that. But frankly, if something like this comes up, I'm not going to sit down and just say, oh, well, it's good enough, it's fine. Leave that to other reviewers to do. Leave that to other people to do. Other people can apologize for, you know, these companies' mistakes and these companies' poor design. But not here. Not here. 100% truthful and unbiased as possible. But, you know, there are natural biases in everyone. Right, I'll catch you in a second now for removing this damn thing. The removal process was far from simple. I was hoping to be able to press against the front of the fan clips and have that relieve the pressure against the hooks of the fins, but that wasn't enough. I then tried to get a wire tie to hook the clip from between the fins, but I had fears this would scrape the finish between the fins, so I decided to back out. I then switched to working on the front of the clips to see if they would flex out of the way, but of course they wouldn't because they've been designed to maintain their form with this kind of pressure. So my final attempt was to get a thinner and smoother wire tie that I had confidence wouldn't scratch the finish to the faces of the fins. And I was able to make this work. It managed to slide just past the fins and gain me the purchase I needed to pull the clip out. While I was able to get one side out with relative ease, the other side was really stuck in place. I didn't have the grip to pull it out immediately, but with the help of some pliers, I was able to pull it out and gain access to my RAM slots once more. So the question is, was there any damage? Well, firstly, there were some dents to the skin on my fingers, and that kind of hurt, but I can live with that. And anyway, who really cares? How was the cooler? Well, it actually turns out it wasn't too bad. There was a little scuff to the top, which was disappointing, and looking further up the stack, it's actually alright. Oh no. A few fins have been bent out of shape, and there's a little more scraping to the outside and inside edges of the fins. Now, we could sit here all day and complain about my technique, and yes, in hindsight, I would have had 2 wires and 2 sets of pliers, but I'd rather shift everyone's attention to the designers that encouraged this action to begin with. If a removal technique was designed in the first place, we wouldn't be having this discussion at all. Well, at least I can access my RAM slots now, so there's some good news. I went with installing just the one stick, since the second slot would be a higher profile stick and it would likely cause a clash. This time round the fan was a little easier to deal with since I've already gone through the issues, and for all my criticism I've dished out so far, not that any of it was unjustified, this cooler has many positives if everything else goes smoothly. I've likely mentioned this earlier, but this fan is claimed to last for 300,000 hours of runtime. That's double the lifespan of the Noctua NHD15S's fan. You could argue that once this fan has been installed, it's intended to run for such a long period of time that removing it is virtually a non-issue. But what if you just happen to forget to install that one stick of RAM? Anyway, speaking of RAM, the rest of the slots can be occupied with the rest of the RAM. In total, we have 2 4GB Crucial Ballistix sticks and 2 8GB G.Skill Ripjaws 5 sticks running at 2400 MHz. That's a total of 24GB of RAM that nearly all gets used when editing these videos. Then the fan can be hooked up to the CPU fan header and we can start the system up for some acoustic and thermal testing. It's worth sticking around for some acoustic testing if you really want to hear some impressive positives about this cooler. So as for the sound test, a rather crude sound test. We've got the microphone at its standard setting that I set it to whenever I do any talking segments, so if you hear me talking here or somewhere else, it'll be with the same settings. This isn't very scientific though, so it's nothing that we can actually compare sounds and block sound files with, so we're just doing it as a very standstill thing right now. I've got my reference, which is a click, to see what the noise sounds like at each level, so if I click right next to it here, then you could in theory line them all up, but we don't really need to. This is very crude. So, at the lowest speed, or at least 20% on the PWM range, this fan is going down to as low as I've seen 270, but it's between 270 and 280 RPM. This is extremely low for a fan. Normally you'd see a minimum of 400, in some cases 500, but yeah, this is down at 270. So I'm assuming that's a 300 RPM plus or minus 10%. We're hitting the lower end of that 10%, but it's not labeled on the box like that. But we find out anyway. It's not like we need to know those figures when we can test it. So this is what 270 RPM sounds like. If you can hear anything, that'll be the hard drive. There is... Unless you get your ear within sort of scratching range, you just can't hear a thing. It's extremely quiet, a really nice, pleasant sound. This will be fantastic if you're just doing some very sort of light internet browsing, things like that, and you want no noise at all. So yeah, perfect. So 270 RPM, basically no noise. I'll see if I can set the microphone up with the camera way closer, something like 20 centimeters away from the fan, to see if it can pick up any more noise. I might have to turn the sensitivity up to achieve that, and then I'll also use the click to see if that works. We'll do that at the end of the sound testing though, but we'll shift up to 60% on the PWM range, see where it hits in terms of speed, and see what that sounds like. So we're at the 60% on the PWM range, and this fan is spinning at about 820 RPM. 820 to 830 RPM is what I've seen. That sounds like this. So very quiet again. I think I breathe more loudly than this, so it's extremely quiet. It really is. There's no surprise that the Be Quiet range of coolers, like the Dark Rock coolers, have been used for so many really quiet sort of 0 decibel builds, as it were. Well, 0 decibel is actually extremely loud. You want to go down to minus 40 decibels or something. I don't know. Anyway, this is why this has been used for so many really quiet builds. But one thing to bear in mind is that because it's not running all that fast, 800 RPM, it really isn't fast in terms of fan speed, although it is a 135mm fan. It doesn't need to spin up as fast as 120mm fans. Again, it's still not very fast, so it's not going to be pushing the airflow that other much faster fans would, which will likely affect its thermal performance. But we need to take in mind when we look at any cooler and compare it to any other cooler, there's differences in fan speed, noise, and the shifting of airflow, the size of the fan, the sweep of the blades, and things like that. So we'll kick it up to the full 100% on the PWM range. We should be expecting to see 1400 RPM, plus or minus 10%, so we'll see where it hits and see what that sounds like. So at 100% on the PWM range, we are looking at 1320 RPM, 1330 RPM, or 1330 RPM if you like saying it that way. Either way, it is what it is. So this is what that sounds like. So again, very quiet, probably the quietest thermal testing that I'm going to have to do. This will probably be running like this for about an hour or so, doing all the thermal tests, so it's going to be quite luxurious compared to a lot of other ones, like the Dynatronic K17 was like being in a hurricane, or stuck inside some sort of factory. But yeah, so this is going to be quite luxurious for me in terms of thermal testing. So we'll see what it performs like. First, we're going to go over the thermal paste application though, and see how that fared. From what we saw before, it should be a good thermal paste spread, and that base is nice and flat and polished, so it should come out pretty well. So I'm out of focus, but the camera, the microphone, is 20 centimeters away from the fan. So this was at the microphone sensitivity we had before. See if you can hear anything now. I've also disabled the hard disk drive as well, so any noise is going to be coming from there, or the Be Quiet power supply unit below, which I think is using the same fan. So here we go. So that's at 20 centimeters away. Now, what I'm going to do is turn up the sensitivity a little bit and see if we can get something where it makes this click a little bit more prominent. Okay, so I've got to speak very quietly now because the mic sensitivity is very high. So if I click from here, you can probably hear that quite well. So brace yourself, I'm going to bring the clicks closer to the microphone. See if you can hear the motor noise. You may be able to just about hear it. I can barely speak without whispering. So that should bring across to you exactly how quiet this thing can be. But it must be emphasized that you likely won't be using it at this speed in a performance scenario. So it's quite hilarious actually trying to be so quiet. So let's move on to the thermal paste application and how that went, if you get what I mean. So after the testing, we can check the thermal paste application to see how much of this ludicrous amount of thermal paste applied was wasted. I really had to rifle through my wire tie bag to find a good pair of ties that were smooth enough to slide between the fins without scratching away the finish. With the grip on each side, I gained a more even removal of the clip. Well, at least that was the theory. I just ran out of grip on one side, which caused a small issue, but with the fan now removed and out of the way, the heatsink could also be removed. Make sure you keep an eye on the bridge as you remove it though. It would be easier to remove this if the motherboard was laid down flat, but frankly I should be able to mount it and dismount it anyway without an issue. So how did the thermal paste spread out? Well, as we saw earlier, when the cooler was mounted incorrectly, even that was able to spread the thermal paste out well. There's a clear indication of how much additional thermal paste was squeezed out the sides and wasted on both the base plate and the CPU heat spreader. But as mentioned earlier, I had concerns about the potential for over-tightening the screws on the mounting bracket arms that could turn into a motherboard standoff over-tightening situation. But checking all of the screws, even the bottom two where I purposely retightened them, I didn't come across any issues here. The rubber washers to the back of the motherboard seem to be doing a great job for allowing a stronger mounting pressure between the nuts and the mounting bracket arms. So we're going to go through the thermals a little differently this time. We'll go through some hybrid benchmarks like Firestrike and Unison Superposition first, then into some real-world style gaming benchmarks, and then we'll round it off with a fully synthetic benchmark, Prime 95. A quick run through the graph setup to get everyone up to speed with what we're looking at. The graph is ordered by cooler height in millimeters, which is represented by the purple bars, so largest at the bottom and smallest at the top, the Dark Rock 4 being right at the bottom. CPU temperature is in degrees Celsius and is logged in a delta T format, which is represented by the blue bars. The delta T format means the temperature of the room is subtracted from the temperature of the component and allows us to more easily compare the temperature results from cooler to cooler. The small dotted blue line is the CPU trend line, which gives us an insight as to how well a cooler is doing on average with all the other coolers. It's a nice little addition for quick analysis and can help to compare coolers of similar sizes. All fans on the test bench are running at full speed to negate any exponential improvements in performance due to fan curves, and the grey bars represent average frames per second, but this is basically irrelevant at this stage since there's no thermal throttling on the CPU and the GPU stays consistent in its performance. So during the explanation, you were looking at the graphics test results from Firestrike, but the physics and combined tests are more CPU intensive, so we'll break those down now. The Be Quiet Dark Rock 4 performs very well in the physics test. This isn't exactly a hardcore CPU benchmark, but there is a clear improvement in the thermal performance over all other CPU coolers. The combined test increases the gap in thermal results, with the Dark Rock 4 5 degrees Celsius better off than the closest cooler, which is actually the 120mm D9L, actually a 110mm cooler, but the mounting bracket doesn't allow it to be so low. Unison Heaven again sees the Dark Rock 4 outperforming the coolers we've tested so far. This is a very low CPU intensive test though, however it does show the CPU is noticeably cooler at this lower load with the Dark Rock 4. Unison Superposition, again another low CPU load scenario, sees the temps of the Dark Rock 4 fall to just above 8 degrees over ambient. This is substantially better than all other coolers at this low load scenario. Onto some gaming benchmarks. Starting off with some light loads, Dirt 3 shows the Dark Rock 4 ahead of the pack by similar margins to the hybrid benchmarks. Same goes for Dirt Showdown. Now, while the Hyper 212 Evo is popular, it's not exactly a strong performer, but we'll find out how the Dark Rock 4 performs in comparison to other large 160mm coolers in the upcoming weeks. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, the Dark Rock 4 is 7 degrees Celsius cooler than the next closest cooler, being the D9L. All of this performance while remaining the quietest cooler on this graph. And the same goes for the Hitman results and GTA 5 results. But Prime 95 is where we see the true worst case scenario for this cooler, albeit on a 6700K on an open air test bench. The hottest CPU temperature we could get was 35.5 degrees Celsius over ambient, so including ambient temperature, that's 58 degrees Celsius. Nearly 10 degrees Celsius hotter is the D9L, and the Hyper 212 Evo is just behind the D9L. That doesn't sound all that impressive, but adding fan curves into the mix and any enclosure to restrict the airflow will see these temperatures get exponentially hotter. So that's pretty much the end of the Dark Rock 4 review. Now, this cooler is extremely capable. It clearly is. You can't hide that it has brilliant acoustics, the best that I've come across out of a cooler so far, and I'm extremely interested to see what the Noctua NH-D15S has to offer in that regard. And there's also the Scythe Mugen 5, just looks awesome. I really hope that that comes in with some really good acoustics to follow the performance it will most likely have. It looks like a really good setup. But this clearly has great acoustic performance and fantastic thermal performance, considering as well the acoustic performance it provides. But that does not escape the fact that it has some glaring issues. Now, there is going to be the odd Be Quiet, no, Dark Rock 4 apologist, or just generally Be Quiet apologist in the comments section of this video, and, you know, many other reviews if they point this sort of thing out, that will criticize, saying, well, you should be more careful when installing. Once it's installed, you won't have to do it again. That's the reason that this, and this. You should have used kitchen paper to install it. You know, it's weird things I can come up with in my head. That, you know, nothing of that was pointed out in the installation, and, you know, it's in the installation manual. It has faults. If you buy a product at a certain price, I definitely feel this sort of thing is worth pointing out, and especially if the product you're buying has a certain finish and the design of that product doesn't do a lot to stop you from wrecking that. If it's going to self-destroy its own finish, that's a problem. You know, that's a problem that needs pointing out, and more so needs fixing and needs preventing, so this kind of thing doesn't happen in the future. Now, I've pointed out ways it could be done, so it can be done, you know, and it doesn't take a genius or somebody with a degree to work this kind of thing out. But clearly there was an aesthetic choice made here, not a functionality choice made here, so that's why we're in the situation we're in with this cooler. So, that's pretty much that. I don't think there's a lot more to say. There's no hard feelings or no ill will towards Be Quiet, towards anyone who likes their products, and anyone at all, to be honest. It's just a case of, I am judging this cooler based on what would it take to make it go from, you know, having issues to not having issues that are, you know, worth bringing up and making a big deal about. And it would take a change in the side style of the cooler to do that. So, that's pretty much that. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it very useful. This is a very capable cooler, and I can't imagine anyone watching this video, unless they had very specific wants and needs for the finish of their cooler, would have much of an issue about going out to buy it immediately. Apart from money, of course, because it's quite a pricey cooler. So anyway, that's pretty much that. I've gone on for way too long. Thanks for checking this one out. I really hope you enjoy it. If you want to check out the price for this, price this thing in your region, then you can go to the Amazon affiliate links in the video description and check those out. If you want to, I don't know, support this video, you can like or dislike the video. And if you like or dislike, please let me know what you thought of the video in the video description. If you have any tips or tricks or anything you want to add to, you know, improve videos in the future, if you have any components you'd like to see reviewed on this channel in the future, then let me know in the video description. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help out, and let me know in the video description if you have any questions or queries. If you want to support this channel even further than that, though, you can always go to the Patreon, which you can check out just there, if I'm right, just there. Head to Patreon, patreon.com/AVTechie, and you can add whatever amount you'd like to support the channel financially. It allows us to get in more interesting things like this. I mean, this is, you know, somewhat, you know, supported by the Patreon of AVTechie, and allow us to get in more interesting things more regularly, depending on my ability to review them at speed, and record them in more interesting ways. There'll be some more interesting videos coming on in the future on that note, which I haven't actually talked about on the channel yet, and I won't be until it's finished, because I think it's more fun that way. So, thanks for checking this one out, guys. Catch you then. Bye-bye.